Hello, welcome everyone, and wish you all a very happy new year. Today, we are going to have a chat regarding some of the essential topics of building a successful AI strategy for your organizations. This is going to be part of a three-part webinar series between ClearPeaks and Dataiku, covering three major broad categories of strategy, project management, as well as implementation and scaling. A quick introduction about myself. My name is Dhiman, and I'm currently heading the Global Advanced Analytics practice for ClearPeaks, where we specialize in end-to-end data analytics. I have close to 12 years of experience working in various aspects of data analytics, AI, machine learning, and decision science with multiple Fortune 500 companies. Having said that, I would also like to welcome Frank from Dataiku to our discussion today. Welcome, Frank, and if you'd like to introduce yourself to the audience we have.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dhiman. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon if you are in the Middle East. Yes, my name is Frank Boudet, and I'm the head of the partnership and alliances team at Dataiku. I've been at Dataiku for about 3.5 years. I'm based in Paris. You may have spotted the French accent there going on in the background, but I've been doing a few other things. I was in the UK, I was in Germany before to being back in France. And worked in industry and now in the software industry for quite some time as well, working with a broad range of customers. So very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Dhiman.
Thank you, Frank, for being here with us. Okay, if you go to the next slide, just so that everybody understands, for better experience for all, we have turned off all your microphones. But in case you have any questions, please use the Q&A section in the Zoom. And if you are joining through the LinkedIn Live option, please put your question in the chat section there as well. And of course, please share your, this session with your remaining network as well. Okay, feel free to do that. So to start off today, I would like to highlight a study that I've read in McKinsey in a while, where it says that the average lifespan of companies listed in the S&P 500 was 61 years in 1958, and today it stands less than 18 years. So in 2027, it's predicted that 75 of the companies that are currently quoted in the S&P 500 would have disappeared. Now, it's actually quite a big realization that, okay, the only way to stay ahead of the curve in any industry today is to continuously innovate and adopt newer technologies. And there is no way around it. And to state the obvious, we all know how much of a game-changing technology AI is in today's world. But although we have seen organizations realize this, understanding the potential of the technology, somewhere they're not reaping the value out of it. The reasoning behind it actually goes across many areas, like we said, and that's why we have come up with this three-part series where we can find out what are the different areas of strategy, management, as well as implementation comes into play to actually reap the full value out of the potential of AI that can bring to any organization. So that's where we are. Today, we are going to talk about the strategy area. Any thoughts, Frank, before we get into things?
Yeah, thank you, Dhiman. So today we'll focus on strategy, and I absolutely agree that the value creation aspect of AI and ML is really important. And I know from our customers and people we speak to from a stakeholder perspective, it can be quite frustrated as well. Actually, the numbers you shared were quite scary, like 3/4 of the company not there by 2027. That is quite scary, to be honest. So when we focus on strategy, we'll focus on three things. We'll focus on roadmap, we'll focus on skills, and we'll focus on platform. So I guess we should get started, Dhiman, and I do have a first question for you. And my question is, what do you say is the most difficult challenge for organization when they try to strategize around AI?
Yes, that's actually a very interesting question, and because there are a lot of areas that companies struggle in today's world when it comes to AI strategy. But to me, the most important or most critical one is identification of the use cases. Right. We have seen lots of companies fail many times into identifying, let's say, proper use cases that can actually bring business value to them. And the only thing that I would like to mention in this area would be, the priority focus for identifying any use case should always be driven by actual business problem. there is a very common theme going on about the novelty factor of AI and machine learning in most of the organization today. So the novelty factor has to be kept aside, and organization stakeholders need to look at the utility factor of any use cases that we are talking about today. So multiple facets towards identifying and strategizing AI use cases, but to start off, definitely the most important one would be the, let's say, the utility aspect of it. And the approach to identifying these use cases should always be top down. Like, you break down a large org level KPI target, okay, and see where that, you do the value chain analysis in your company and find out, okay, this KPI is actually impacting or coming from these various problem statements from across your organization, and those problem statements then can become one use case for your organization. But whether or not they are an AI use case, that's definitely another, let's say, assessment. But it has to be a value driven conversation whenever we are talking about use cases for AI. What has been, I mean, your experience, what has been like that in that area?
Yeah, we see that as well. And the way we at Dataiku refer to this, like when we talked about the coolness on the one hand and the utility on the other hand, we think about it like the mundane, like what needs to get done is useful, versus the moonshot. You want to do both. And this is just one of a number of other tensions that our customers and people we speak to see. One other is complying with IT standards. But at the same time, you want to give freedom to your team. You want to demonstrate value fast, but at the same time, you want to set up sustainable success. So those tensions are there. So we certainly see all of those. But back to your point around the use cases, no doubt, I agree. It has to be based on the value and the impact to select which are the best use cases. One thing I'd like to add is readiness. We hear a lot about readiness concern. We know that AI solutions require a certain skill set that are acquired or tapped into. And if you don't have that, you can't really go anywhere, really. So in those circumstances, we also see people, and I think that's the biggest danger. That's the biggest challenge from my perspective. We see people going into this sort of, I like the expression personally, is analysis paralysis mode. Like they don't know where to start, so they don't start. I think that's the biggest challenge. AI and ML is going to be front and center for organizations. And, we spoke about survival of companies, the scary numbers you gave at the beginning. And, I guess companies don't have to change, but they don't have to survive either, right? It's like there's no pressure, but there is a landscape where AI is becoming increasingly commonplace, and a lot of companies are using it. So there's a fear of missing out, if you like. And certainly from this is a strategy podcast or webcast, C-level people are telling us that the board members are asking them questions. What do you do, or what are you about to do in terms of AI? So there's this thing about short-term versus long-term, but the thing is starting now. A couple of more things, if you like, on that topic. So one is, if you're not able to prove quickly that AI can deliver significant and tangible business value, then you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle to gain internal trust and succeed in your long-term AI ambitions. So strategically, you need to set up success in the present, right now, that will guarantee positive change and success for years to come. And here's my personal recommendation. So strategically choose or your initial set of use cases. And you spoke about the utility function. I think this is spot on, Dhiman. And then also the people dimension. Identify the ambassadors, the early adopters that will drive the reuse and evangelize on the value of AI. Now, once you've gone to the limited short-term use case, quick win delivery, you need to look at other things. The first thing is a plan for getting past this experimentation and moving beyond the initial success with low-hanging fruit use cases. That's the first thing. The second one is, think about your existing capabilities and processes. Do you have what it takes? Have you thought about AI governance, for example? There's a lot of noise. It's not a noise, actually. It's information in the news around some challenges. So think about your capability and your processes. And the other thing is, back to the people thread, is upskilling. Maybe you're going to ask for help from a partner. That's what we do at Dataiku, and we encourage our customers to do the same. But you probably want to think about upskilling program for your people. So I guess back to you, Dhiman, maybe a question would be, how do customers know that they are ready to move forward? Or is everybody ready? Or how do you know you're ready to move forward?
Yeah, that's actually every organization, they have their own requirements. They are different in sizes. They have their own challenges as well. So this question definitely has to be taken in a very customized way. But in very, very high level, I would suggest there are three major categories that you have to assess yourself in. One is the data and platform. That's kind of the raw materials that you require for any AI strategy to work. And the next one are the person or the personnel or the resources that you need who would build that for you. And then, of course, the third area is the roadmap, the proper vision and the implementation strategy that you have in phases for your organization, right? So these are the three major areas. Now, the most important or most challenging area I would suggest here is the first one, the data and platform readiness. Okay. um, most projects that I have seen fail is because of incompleteness of either data or their platform. So either the
Could you say a bit
platform
more? Could you explain that a bit better? What do you mean by that?
so incompleteness of data, let's say, is very straightforward, and I think most of the companies have already realized that by now, that the necessary data and the representation of that is required is not always available. People think, or organizations think that, okay, I already have a data warehouse, or let's say I already have a data lake, and I have high quantity of data, which means I'm ready to do a AI use case. But that's not always the fact. Representation and the quality of data is equally important. If you have mass volume of data, is not exactly the only, let's say, key point for having a good AI implementation. Most companies already realize that, okay, if you have a lot of data but they're not of the right quality, it's going to be a garbage in garbage out scenario. So making sure that you have the right quality of data and complete sense of your business operations represented through that data is very, very important. That's number one. And at the same time, that goes hand in hand with data is the platform. Obviously, there's always going to be the question of, like, when you mentioned short term, long term, my preference or my suggestion to any organization would be, always think long term when you're thinking about platform. Because I know I keep hearing this, business transformation, or let's say IT transformation projects that are coming in. That's most of the time because they have not done the due diligence because of identifying the right platform at the beginning. Okay, so go for something that has a right roadmap, that has the right vision for AI and ML in the future. Okay, whenever organizations are actually looking for options in the market, they should ask the vendor that, okay, tell me what's the company's roadmap for the next 2 years, next 5 years, or something like that. That what other features and functionality would you bring in this platform? So that's one very important area to look at. Regarding the resources that you mentioned, which is the second area, that it's actually a challenge we all are facing. Okay, so I mean, talk about SI companies or consulting firms, or let's say product companies, as well as the final client organizations as well. Finding the right skilled resources is definitely a challenge, which is changing, day by day, but we still have a long way to go. And the proper role structuring of different, these roles that we know, what do you mean by a data scientist? I mean, the definition of data scientist is so interchangeably used, and there's a lot of gray area around it. So an organization need to clearly understand that, okay, these are the exact roles that I require. And then finally is about the roadmap. I think goes hand in hand with the number of use cases, the strategic KPI that they are impacting towards, and again, in the descending priority of value and feasibility of the use cases. I often hear people talk about, like, you mentioned this very beautifully, like this analysis paralysis mode, right? customers come and say that, okay, we are now at our data warehouse journey. We are trying to set up a data engineering process, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, I would also suggest, let's say, for example, you have 15 use cases in mind that can impact your business processes in different ways. Maybe you're not ready to implement all of those 15 at this point of time, but I'm sure that you would have at least one or two that you can start right now. And while you're implementing those one or two feasible use cases at this point of time, you can actually prepare and let's say prepare the data for the next two use cases. And that's how you should roll the ball with these kind of situations. So obviously, I mean, those are some of the key points in terms of readiness when we are talking about. Okay. When we talk about readiness as well, and I think we have discussed very uh, in details about the platform side as well, but I would like to hear your thoughts about, uh, because you guys are a platform company. Dataiku is one of the wonderful platforms that we have for end-to-end AI out there. I would like to hear your thoughts regarding when companies are talking about platform choices or platform readiness. What are the areas that customers should look at specifically?
Yeah, sure. So when we think about readiness, I think it's an important topic because there's two different scenarios or two different ways of getting it wrong. Either you think you're more mature than you are, which we see a lot, to be honest, or the
Yeah.
other way around. People think they're not as mature as they actually really are, and in both cases, it's bad because whatever next step you decide may not be the right one for you based on where you are. So what we used to work with our customers is a maturity model. Now there's different types of maturity model. Actually, maybe we can show you one so everyone can see it. So that's a maturity model we're using at Dataiku. It's 5-step, and you'll notice it's always, we call that the 5 E's actually, because it all starts with an E. So the first one is to explore on what AI actually is, starting with always the most basic question, the why question, and evangelize on the need to leverage AI. So that's the exploration.
Yeah.
Then the next step is to experiment the value of AI with the first pilots and maybe build some awareness. Then you move to establishing tangible value, thanks to a few use cases, and lay the foundation for the next step, the scale, which we call expand in this case. So then you just have a wider rollout, you expand across the organization, and you accelerate the business value. And you can see actually that the X time, we didn't put time here on purpose in terms of does it take 2 months or 2 years, because it depends on how much resources you're putting and where you are. And the last and final part, if it's ever final, is embed. Embed is when AI in pretty much every single activity is part of the DNA of the organization. So that's a maturity model that we're using. There are others, but I think it works pretty well. In our experience, a platform approach is the best approach because it's end-to-end, and it saves clients from having different platforms and different solutions, and that's very ineffective. So that's one way of having one platform, through those 5 steps. If you only have one platform, then you can accelerate faster. And one concept which is very close to my heart is what I call future-proofing. Let me explain what I mean by that.
Absolutely. Yes.
So future-proofing is, stating the obvious here, but the choice you make today have an impact on the future. And in the fast-moving world of AI, well, I don't know about you, but I don't know what the future will look like. But there are some things we know. We know about data sources have changed, whether it's on Hadoop, on-prem, on the cloud, maybe on number of clouds, maybe on-prem and on the cloud being hybrid. We know it's moving, and we have a bit of an idea where it's going, although we don't know exactly where it's going to land. Think about deployment models. How are you deploying software today or consuming software, and how will you do it tomorrow? There's a lot of things. So future-proofing is this idea of when people look at a roadmap and their maturity is making the right choices that will be with them for the foreseeable future. I'm not going to give a timeline, but that's really important to think about the maturity, and we can help with that if people want to pick that up later on, as well as future-proofing, thinking about the cost, because there's a lot of cost associated with obsolescence in the world of IT.
Yes.
Now, I know the platform is not the only thing. There's also what I would call plug and play solution. And actually, I'd like your view, Dhiman, on this. Do you have a preference, or what's your thoughts around what's best, plug and play solutions and platform? How do you see it?
Yeah, it reminds me of a joke actually. But before getting to that,
I want to hear the joke now.
no, before getting to that, I would like to add on to, because I really love the graph that I've seen, and there was two areas that I absolutely relate to very, very well. One is the experiment, and the one is the the full enterprise or the embedding part of it. So couple of points, uh, if any organization is actually planning for a AI vision for their organization, it has to be broken down into two areas. One is this building this nascent experimentation culture within their organization. The fundamental of any operational excellence is exploration versus exploitation. Like anybody who comes from an operations research background would understand what I'm talking about. So this, if you don't explore enough, if you don't experiment enough, you're not going to find the next big thing. But if you're going to overdo it, you're going to lose too much in R&D, and so strike the right balance.
Yeah.
That's very, very important. And it has to become a culture. Like, okay, I need to make sure, I need to create a market mix model for my marketing team. Let's do a direct, let's get into a multi-regression model and get it done with. No, that should not be the case. Try out more options, do a little more exploration before you seal the deal, right? And final one is the embedding part of it, like full enterprise AI. If you have a model, it needs to be consumed. It cannot just be a model lying there in the corner. Okay, if it is
put on
lying
the
there,
shelf, it looks pretty. Put on the shelf, look at it.
Yeah. Just
No
dust
points.
it off.
Yeah.
Throw it off. If it's not being consumed, that means it was not decided right. Okay. Now coming back, to the question that you had regarding the plug and play. So whenever I hear plug and play, that's definitely the appeal. I relate to why customers prefer that. Quick turnaround time, quick wins, and it's very tactical in nature. That goes against the conversational topic that we are talking about the tactical response here to a strategy discussion, which is the irony of it. But definitely when we are talking strategy, plug and play solutions never generally comes across that well. It does have its merit at times, but you have to be very careful. But coming to the joke that I was talking about, whenever I hear about plug and play, it sounds like someone is trying to buy intelligence, right? And which you can't. And the worst part to it is, let's say a company X comes up with a plug and play solution for a set process of business problem, and let's say 5 companies buy that solution. So end of the day, what happens is you're basically averaging yourself out with the 5 companies that who are buying that solution. And if you are competitors, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot, right? So if you have to innovate, that brings back to my first point, that the only way that you can actually stay ahead of the curve is to be customized as much as possible, and at the same time innovate all the way. And the advantage of putting yourself ahead of others has to be always the goal. Now, so that's my understanding of plug and play. It's a touchy subject. Some I can definitely debate about where it has value, but yeah, personally I definitely would prefer the build option rather than buy at any given day. Okay. And at the same time, we also need to understand how it actually impacts different roles in the organization. Like obviously if you're trying to build it, you'll require massive resources, or let's say a lot of time to build it across. But that's not always the case. Let's say if there are any regulation changes or policy changes from government, the solution that you're utilizing might not be applicable anymore, and you actually become dependent on that solution provider to actually make those policy changes or regulation changes, and then make changes and abide by the policy changes of the government. So there are multiple areas where it might go wrong. Okay. Which actually brings me to a very interesting thought. Like, there are multiple roles in the AI world. Okay. And they are evolving at times. We are looking at, if you go to LinkedIn, you can see so many different variety of titles that you I sometimes get very, very confused. But at the same time, they do have different roles in an organization, right? And one thing that I really love about Dataiku, that it actually covers a wide, array of personas, what you guys call it, right? If you'd like, can you just throw a little bit light, a little bit of details around that?
Yeah, sure. It is, people is clearly a very important topic. And there's different persona involved in those projects. There's IT, there's the business, there's the data scientists. There's also maybe compliance team, depending on the use cases. So there was a question around use cases in telco. We'll talk about that later on. But maybe I can, probe a little bit further in the data scientists, because it could be confusing. And one of the things that we believe, it's a belief, right? But it's not just based on nothing. It's based on our experience and the successes of our customers. Our belief is collaboration is key. All right.
Absolutely.
But collaboration between who? Maybe there's a visual we can use to illustrate the points around the different types of data scientists. And this is just for data scientists, right? I mean, there's other persona that I talked about. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but you get all sorts, right? You get the vertical experts, top left, someone who would know the industry very well, but maybe then would be a little bit less savvy on statistics. If I go to the other diagonal, the statistician in yellow, someone who's maybe very sharp in statistics, but maybe not super talented with, maybe programming, like the legend. The legend, very good with any programming languages, C++, Python, you name it, he knows it all, or she knows it all in this case. It could be a generalist in the middle, doing a bit of everything. It could be someone who specializes in machine learning. So there's so many different types of persona. And the belief that I was talking about is that all those persona need to be using the same platform and need to collaborate. And they collaborate among themselves and with other members of the organization. So, and that's kind of what we propose at Dataiku, something that can collaborate, because to your earlier point, talent is very scarce. So,
yes,
you can't just expect to find all the skills very easily. So it's also about upskilling some people, having some people involved, and of course, getting help externally from companies like ClearPeaks, as an example, of course. Okay, so that's for different types of persona. Maybe back to you, Dhiman. I wanted to ask you a little bit more around if we turn the table, and what about your vision for an ideal strategy? And I think we're going to come to the slowly towards the end of this this conversation. But yeah, what about your vision for the ideal AI strategy?
Yeah, I think I've already touched on this topic a while ago when I was talking about this exploration and experimentation part and the embedding part of it. But in ClearPeaks, what we try to call it as the I think integrated and operational AI. Okay, so we have a slide that actually basically shows that. Okay, it's kind of it's kind of a structure that actually looks at the overall strategy or implementation from both perspectives. Like if you talk about the operational AI part, that's essentially how your business operates. So it definitely has to be broken down from the top. So you have a strategy, it's attached to a KPI. It then basically gets designed and broken down into multiple other problem statements. And then you basically get into the thick of things, do the implementation. And at the most bottom layer is where the integration comes in. But at the same time, the collaboration aspect that you've talked about, whenever you're talking to your business and the IT team, they have to actually realize, respect, and understand each other. And because these are so contradictory viewpoints, business always looks at things from a top-down approach, but the IT looks at it from a very bottom-up approach. They have to come to the middle and understand that, okay, this is how the entire organization needs to work like. Okay, so I should not just build a deep learning model because it's the coolest thing to build. Okay, or I should not build something that can only give me offline predictions, or let's say batch predictions. If the business demands that to be in a real-time manner, you have to do those additional engineering work, like create those REST APIs, make sure that your business platforms like your CRM or your sales systems are actually integrated with those REST APIs, which can take help of those predictions at the right time and to the right people, right? So end of the day, it all boils down to how AI can help you make better decisions. Okay, and that's the core of anything that we are doing here. End of the day, whatever you are building, if it's not helping your business to make better decision than yesterday, it's all the same. You use BI, AI, that doesn't matter,
Yep.
right? So that's kind of the essence of my vision in anything around AI is. What would be yours? I mean, do you have um, anything else to add?
Yeah, well, I think ideally, we would like to see organizations not having to go to so many different places to get, the data job done. I think it's a bit of a waste of time. And
Yeah,
our tagline at Dataiku is everyday AI, extraordinary people. So back to the people conversation, which we think is very important. And sometimes people think AI is scary and the whole robot thing. We don't
yeah,
think so. We think people are at the heart of the AI strategy and everyday AI. Because I think if we try to look at the future a little bit, I think AI at some point will it's going to be everywhere if it isn't already. So everywhere, every day, AI is becoming infused within companies. And maybe one last word on that is remember this maturity curve that I was telling you about. This is a very generic curve, but our vision at Dataiku is to try to steepen, if you can see my hand here on the screen,
yeah.
is trying to change the curve and make it steeper so that the X dimension, which was time, instead of being, maybe 18 months,
Longer.
maybe we can do it
Yeah,
in 9 months because,
yeah.
the Y was the value. And that's what we want. We want to get to that value, sorry, in a shorter amount of time. So keep that maturity model. And what we propose is to try to steepen that curve.
Perfect.
So yeah,
Uh,
back to you, man. I think we're going to come to the end of this conversation. I saw there's a couple of questions as well. I think this is
yes.
important to take them, but back to you maybe for last few words.
Yeah. So I think we have covered really quite well on the different aspects of the strategy conversation that AI can bring to any organization. Okay. Definitely resource, roadmap, platform, data. These are the key areas that any organization should look at. I think the next steps that we should, before we take the questions, I can see a couple of questions in the Q&A already.
Mhm.
Before we have that, what we would like to do is, please reach out to ClearPeaks or Dataiku in case you want to discuss any of these things further on your AI strategy. It can be, we can do a 360-degree AI assessment workshop for you, or do let's say the use case identification workshop, or do this maturity assessment altogether, and then see where things can go, right? So with that, let's see what kind of questions we have. Okay. Uh, Please use the Q&A, and obviously people who are joining from the LinkedIn Live, please use the chat option out there. I think we have a question. The first one is, what would be a probable use case for telco industry? Uh, I think telco industry is quite mature, right? And talk about like CLTV modeling, churn prediction, recommendation platforms, or the next best action or the next best service, um, or anything of that sort is very, very applicable. If you want to take it on a much higher level, there can be optimization for your networks, optimization for your, let's say, the um, installations that you have of your hardware across the city, across different geographies. Those can also be interesting use cases that goes across geospatial and so on and so forth. But I think, Frank, in Dataiku website, there's quite a huge category of industry use cases that anybody
Yeah,
can
I'll
go
maybe
in and
just
look
give
at.
a couple of examples to telco. I mean, it's one of many industries, of course, but it turns out that four of the largest telco companies in the world are Dataiku customers, and I can't obviously share everything, but I can name certainly Telefonica as a public reference, and maybe to name one use case, because the question was around use case. Well, there's the classic, sales and marketing, like churn and
Hmm.
segmentation, upselling. But one that may be a little bit different is around R&D, and I can name the customer in this case as Ericsson. And Ericsson built a human-centered machine learning tool using DSS, Dataiku, to dimension the resources in telecom for their R&D, and they were able to save 90% saving in R&D costs. So it's quite impressive. So it's sales and marketing, but not only. Here I give an R&D example.
Perfect. Okay, moving to the next one. In an agile world, everything changes, and we don't have clarity on how we can do anything, where the data will come from, where it will be analyzed, and where it will be stored, even if we know that all may change.
Yep.
How flexible? Yeah, that's actually, I mean, this is a very real question. I mean, I can totally relate to this. How flexible Dataiku DSS is to understand the requirements or give recommendations for improvements.
Yeah, sure. Mitchell, I think I'll pay this one. Thank you, Ziad, for your question. Yeah, I mean, it's like we don't know what the future will be like. So, what can we do about it? Well, okay, we don't know, but we have a bit of an idea. And how flexible we Dataiku want to be is giving you the options. Whether your data is local or on the cloud, whether it's both, whether it's Hadoop, whether you start using Kubernetes, Dataiku can cater for all of the things I've mentioned before. So, and when things change, we'll try to cater for those new things. We're quite sharp in getting on new technologies when we think they are viable technologies, because there's a lot of new things that come and go as soon as they arrive. And then what we're also very happy to do is make recommendation. Dataiku with ClearPeaks, we have a wealth of experience, and we can make suggestions as to what would work. Maybe one final remark on this question. The way I think of Dataiku is an orchestration platform for data science projects. So it's just that, an orchestration platform. I'm thinking about a train right now, and having switch left to right, center. This is how we can make it as flexible for our customers, for our users. Thank you, Ziad, for your question. I think there's another one from Michael. Michael is asking about for strategy. Isn't strategy supporting the deployment? Hence, it should be first in the integration. I don't know if you want to take this one, Dhiman.
Yeah. And I think the deployment, like you have to understand the integration points before you go into the deployment. So that's what we meant in the triangle, right? So whenever you're like, let's say you have a business on the top, they have a strategy corresponding to multiple KPIs, and then each of those KPIs can actually break down into multiple design statements, like let's say problem statements, and then you figure out the integration, and then you go for the deployment. So before deployment, you basically have to do between the design and deployment, you actually have to think ahead and understand the integration points and then go for it. Okay. So that's what we meant there. I think there are a couple of other questions in the chat.
There's one on, do you think that blockchain will play a major role on data science? I don't have a clearly defined answer. I think blockchain is a great technology. It's been with us for quite some time now, actually, when you think about it. And there are a lot of use cases, that we all know about. Part of me, if I'm 100% honest, think it's a bit of a hype as well. And I'm,
yes.
I'm super boring. I don't have time for hype. So I'm not sure if it really is going to play a key role in data science. I'm tempted to say if it is, then it probably already would have played a major role. But maybe I'm a skeptic, and maybe you're an optimist, Dhiman. What's your perception?
See, I look at blockchain on the other side of the spectrum. Like whenever we're talking about advanced analytics or let's say data science, it's post data being generated, right? And blockchain is in the side of the world or in the side of the tech where they are part of the system which generates the data. So they are trying to revolutionize how transactions are being made, how each of them are actually talking to each other, how securely that can be tracked, and so on and so forth. That's more application oriented, security oriented, and they have a major role to play in how data in the future, like if you talk about Web 3.0 and all those things, blockchain is definitely going to play a major role there. And in those areas, blockchain will definitely play a major role in how data is going to be generated for the future. Okay. And the representation of data is going to change. The read and write structure of those as well is going to change. What data science or what kind of impact would that have on data science? Yes, is yet unknown, because data science is actually after the data is being generated. Once you can read it, and bring it to a structure that is available or fit for your model to run and find patterns for. It doesn't matter whether it's blockchain or your plain old CSV file or any Oracle database, doesn't matter.
Yes. All right. I think there's more questions, but I'm wondering if we should bring the session to an end, Dhiman, to respect everybody's time. Up to you.
Sure. And if we have any questions remaining, we'll reach out to them personally and take it from there.
Yeah, and there's people there's a few questions we haven't taken the time to answer, so we'll reach out to the people directly. And if there's more, they should reach out to us, of course. You're quite right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think before we move on, just a quick announcement for the audience today. As we said, this is a 3-part webinar series. Today, we were focusing mainly on the strategy conversation of AI. The next one is going to be on the project and the management of projects. And I know how difficult it is to run a successful AI project. So the next webinar is on that. How do you make your AI project successful? And obviously, the next one would be regarding the end-to-end AI operationalizing and, let's say, scaling your AI initiative. That's more on the techie and the, let's say, the implementation side of nitty-gritty things. So one in next month and one in the month after that. So please stay tuned and let us know if you have any further questions. We'll definitely be, would love to help you out in any way.
Sounds good. Well, again, thank you very much, Dhiman, for the invitation. I think we're now showing some contact details on the screen, but I'm sure people know how to get hold of us. I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar. I'm seeing some thank you, and this is warming my heart, if I'm honest with you. So I hope you enjoyed it. And if so, make sure you tune into the next session in February.